This is the RTM meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee starting at 7:32. We have guests of Dr. Byrne, Robin Nelson, and Rich Rudel. And I've asked Paul Hendrickson to join us as well from the Board of Finance. Let me give some things here. I hope that everybody had an opportunity to look at the RTM Education Committee meeting so that we're not asking the same questions they asked, but in fact, we can build on them. But, I from listening to that meeting, you heard that Eric, Robin, and Rich were in an all-day meeting listening to software. And I understand that may be somebody's job, but that's a long day. So we don't need to make it any longer for them. The other things, there's some things I wanted to do on the starting ground. We are focused on the budget, but for the most part, this is to develop some subject matter expertise in some of the main categories of the Board of Ed so that we have that knowledge base within the committee. We have new people here as well who haven't gone through a couple of cycles there. We do want to focus on some things here, the self-insurance, the mechanics, and the operations of it, which I mentioned to Rich. Special ed, there's some things I'd like to confirm from my interpretation to tell them that I'm right. Besides Eric, Paul has great knowledge of this as well. And also the grants, because last year I raised a question on the grants that the Board of Ed gets. And so I want to just briefly touch on that. And so that's pretty much it. I'm also just so, and I can't speak for everyone who hasn't voted yet, but for those who didn't have an opportunity to listen to last night's meeting, there was approximately 441,000 or something all combined of early retirement funds that are reducing the overall budget. I'm not telling you what that number is. I just remember what the differences are. And that brings it down to about 351. At 388, based upon how this budget was presented, although I do like you to move it to the 351 when your board votes, I could pretty much say that this committee would probably pass it tonight, providing no catastrophic event occurs between now and when the Board of Finance looks at it. What Paul mentioned, what Peter mentioned, I think many of the members of this committee have echoed. So again, we're asking questions on the budget, but it's more to have an understanding of the general concept of some of these component parts rather than a challenge to what's there. So I just like to set that as what we're going. Although if somebody has a challenge, feel free to speak up. All right. I'm going to start with grants only because, look, the federal government has basically disbanded the Department of Education. On occasion, funds are being moved from what congressional funds were authorized to spend anyway. So the big grant is the special ed grant, which is about $900,000. Have anybody heard anything that may put that at risk next year?
We have not had any communication that it's at risk. We just got something yesterday and a follow-up today that the FY26 funding from the federal government was approved yesterday. So, Rich, I don't know if you have any more light from your colleagues and what you've heard from CASBO.
Yeah, there's no risk to the IDA funds.
Okay, I just always like to ask that question because at almost $1 million, that's a big, and I believe there's something like 16 paras or something in there, if I'm not mistaken. Um, that's something that isn't on necessarily the operating budget, but should any of those go away, some there's going to have to be some additional funding coming in. So I like to just ask that.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Um, all right, self-insurance. I'm going to make some statements. Rich, on your computer, there's a little buzz thing so that if I'm saying something wrong, just press it. I get an electric shock and know that you have to speak. All right, self-insurance. The employees have the same provider that they had before. So there's no change to the employees. All
Correct.
right. What we're hired is the insurance company is using their network and processing the claims for us. We really don't have to we're not doing anything by looking at claims or other things along those lines. They have it. All right. And so the only change is that the part that's funded in the past by insurance, the Board of Ed is now funding. They have approximately $18 million anticipated of what they will have to fund. It's not being deposited in July 1st, we're not putting $18 million in there. I actually asked Rich if we were, but we don't have enough tax money collected to do that yet. So approximately 1.5 million will be put in thereabouts for each, or 1.25, something along those lines, for each of the 12 months of the year. The fund will build up. We're not anticipating to see July claims until sometime in August, so we have some time to build up that fund. Claims that were from the prior year, May and June, they will be applied to the old fund and be paid by, I believe it's Aetna,
Anthem.
Anthem rather. So they'll be paid by Anthem. You see that buzzer works.
Mhm.
The So they'll be paid by Anthem. So that's not added to it. This is going to be a separate fund. So, Rich, I'm assuming that the Board of Finance needs to set up this fund in anticipation and approval of the budget.
So it's not like a different bank account. It's just like it's segregated from the Board of Ed's operating account, similar to the cafeteria account.
Okay.
So they don't have to set up like a separate bank account for this.
Okay. Sounds good. Um, yeah. Well, even the segregation, sometimes we have like funds that are used, it's all in the general fund, but they account for it in a separate fund area.
So yeah,
So
within
I don't know
within
what
the
they're going
Board
to
of
do
Ed,
on
we
it.
would have a separate fund carved out.
Okay. All right. Um, for my committee's knowledge, funds can be in a negative balance. So, not that this fund is going to be in a negative balance at the end of the year, should it be greater than what's anticipated in the budget, because there will be in a special appropriation to clean it up. But just know that funds don't always have to be in a positive. So, if we end up with one month that's very heavy and it goes over what the amounts were, it can go into a deficit, right, without people worrying about funding it until the end of the year. After that, let's see, the overdraft, expected funds. Oh, what do you expect the fund balance to be at the end of the year? I saw that it had 10 to 12% is what a healthy fund is, but typically you're anticipating 3 years to get there. So would it be about 600,000? And
So
you'd
we would
be
we would hope that it would be between 5 and 8% of expected claims. So
okay.
between 5 and 8% of that 18.9 million. And obviously it'll depend on the claims, but you would build that up over time.
All right. And the claims that you're using have been calculated. I believe we use Brown and Brown, and so they use some actuarial
Yep. So
calculation.
Brown and Brown is our insurance consultant. They look at like the last 24 months of claims, the trailing claims, the claims within the year. They start to dig into the claims, whether or not some of those are expected to continue or not continue. And it's all built into their actuarial assumption of what we should anticipate.
Now, we have two insurance policies to give us some protection. One is on an individual that maxes out with theirs. I believe it was what was it
So
250?
250. So we would have two insurance policies, individual stop loss at 250,000. So what that means is the first $250,000 of expense for an employee, the board is responsible for paying. Anything in excess of that 250, that insurance policy kicks in. So that's designed in order to mitigate some of the risks that you might have for some high claimants that might pop up if there was a catastrophic illness or injury that an employee or a dependent might have. And then aggregate stop loss, which is a insurance policy that protects against the aggregate claim. So ours right now we're estimated to be 18.9 million. So 20% above that would be the maximum exposure for the Board of Ed, and then that aggregate stop loss insurance would kick in.
So the biggest exposure would be about 3.8.
Correct.
Okay. All right. From there, I'll open up the floor to any other information people want on how this works, the mechanics and the operation. Here.
Uh, so I watched your prior meeting, which was very helpful. I think it would be helpful for the committee here who are not insurance people. And I do have an insurance background, so a lot of the insurance speak makes sense to me. I just want to clarify a few things. One, your individual stop loss. At $250,000, you've covered all that employees or individuals' expenses. Once we get there, the insurance policy kicks in. Just for clarity for everyone else, the insurance policy kicks in, and if that's a $10 million claim or whatever, the insurance is covering that. There's no risk to the employee that they're going to get capped out because you've done the self-insurance here.
Correct. Yeah. So there's no impact on the employee. It's really the funding mechanism in which the board chooses to pay for health insurance.
Right. Okay. So that 250,000, it would take either catastrophic, like you have a lot of employees to get to your $18 million loss. Is that the right way to think about this?
So to exceed that 18.9 million, you'd likely have to have a lot of things go wrong. It's not typical for districts who are self-insured to ever actually hit that aggregate stop loss insurance. That's kind of like the perfect storm, a lot of illnesses, maybe a lot of catastrophic injuries or whatever it might be that cause that. There are certainly incidents on the individual level where we have people who exceed that 250,000. We have that now as a fully insured, which is why we would want to have that individual stop loss.
Okay, so uh, I'm just trying to explain it in real plain English. So at $250,000 per employee, is that per episode for the employee? Could the employee come back, unfortunately, like 3 times in the year and have a different insurance claim that we'd be liable for? So it
So
could be
it's
as
all
much as 750 for that
yeah, so it's
employee.
all cumulative. So one employee could have $1 million worth of claims because they've had something obviously go not well, and then so that 250 is on us, and then that 750 is on the insurance policy.
So it doesn't matter if, they've got some illness in the beginning of the year that
Yeah,
is whatever it is, and then a separate illness that kicks in later. That's the aggregate for the employee.
yeah. So it's whether they go to the doctor once and have a really bad episode, or they go 50 times and accumulates.
Okay. All right. So again, I'm hoping this is helpful for the committee because it's how I understand it. So in fact, to get to $18.9 million, how many employees would have to kick in at 250 to get us there? And what percentage of our covered employees does that represent?
So you'd have to have at least over 75 people, I think, hit that 250. We have 630 out of a little over 800 employees who take insurance, and then we have about 1,400 covered lives. So obviously, that covered life include like if you have a spouse on your plan or a dependent
Yeah.
like a child.
Okay. So it's not the way I think of it is it's not an insignificant percentage. It's not like 1 or 2% or anything. You're covering close, it sounded like 10, I'm not doing the math in my head right now, but it sounds like you're covering 10 to 13%, somewhere in there, of the employees with the loss limit.
So historically, over the last, 5 years, we've seen between 4 and 12 people hit that 250,000 threshold. We do have more that are kind of bunched in that 50 to $150,000 range.
Mhm.
But if we look historically, it's, between 4 and 12 to 15 that would hit that stop loss.
Okay. So my takeaway is one of the risks of going self-insured, just from a practical perspective, is you've got a limit of self-insurance that is genuinely hard to hit, right? Just when you think about the sheer number of the employees, the claims, it's kind of a perfect storm that would have to hit before you'd ever even get there.
Correct.
Okay. Then my second part of the question is, and this may be redundant to what Jack was explaining earlier, but you are anticipating, a certain number of claims during the year. But you're not like setting aside money in a separate account. You're just kind of aggregating up. If you have a good month and you have, no claims, there's like a credit balance you're building up, right? And ultimately, the strategy of being self-insured should be over a number of years, you will save enough so that the difference that you would experience in terms of a catastrophic year where you're paying out everything, you've built up what you've saved in premiums essentially over that period of time. That's kind
Correct. So rather than paying out premiums in advance to Anthem as the example, where they're collecting that money and then hoping that it's enough to cover, and if it's not, building in a rate increase the following year, you're building up those funds to pay the claims, and the hope obviously is that the claims are less than that you've built up, and then that creates that reserve should you have a year where maybe claims don't go your way.
of okay. And so when I was listening to this, you know, all right, this is the skeptic in me, so forgive me. I don't want, I'm going to phrase my question poorly, but there isn't like a pool of money that should be allocated each year to, the insurance premium savings, like building up that cushion that the Board of Ed could dip into if they had unexpected expenses elsewhere. Like I'm trying to make sure that we're true to what we're saying when we do the self-insurance and not commingling money, moving it from one pocket to the other.
So typically that's why you create what's called an internal services fund. And what you see in the board's budget as health insurance is a contribution into that fund. And so as Jack mentioned, every month we're moving 1/12 of that money into that fund to pay out the expenses related to insurance. That builds up a reserve. And I mentioned this at one of the presentations. One of the ways that boards of ed can sometimes get in trouble is over time, maybe you've built up a lot of money in reserves in that internal services fund. And maybe you have a year down the road where the budget's not so kind to you. You have a lot of pressures, whether it's special education or whatever it might be. Some boards of ed have gotten in trouble where maybe they will pull money out of reserves or short funded really in a contribution to an internal services fund to help offset that. And inevitably, when you do that, if you do that too many times or you do that in a year where you have bad expenditures, you kind of leave yourself in a bad position. And so, one of the things I stressed during that meeting is you really do have to fight the temptation when you do have a bad budget year at some point to essentially raid that bank to cover other expenditures because all you're doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you end up in a bad spot. And so there are districts out there that have chosen in bad budget seasons to short the contribution, meaning if they thought they were getting $18 million in claims, but they had a really nice reserve, maybe they put 17 million in it and hope for the best. And then use that extra million for something else, and that almost always gets districts in trouble.
So how do we get, other than we have great leadership and a fabulous board and you're all great, how do we at the RTM and our budget committee get comfortable? What are the checks and balances
Sure.
that exist, or how can we add some to make sure we tap the brakes?
Yep. So just like we have a monthly finance report where we go over in detail our structure of what's going good, what's going bad, and what it looks like. We're going to do the same thing with the internal services fund. So every month we're going to say, the fund balance is this, claims were this, we were either positive or negative. And at that point, it's going to be public whether or not the board, theoretically wants to pull money out. And at that point, that's the chance for whether it's the RTM or the Board of Finance or whoever to kind of raise that red flag and, pump the brakes. And say, well, no, that's not really what the purpose of this was for. Because at the end of the day, if the board were to choose to do that, they would still have to approve a transfer out of that contribution to Internal Services Fund. It would have to be in public. So it would be highlighted for the community to see that.
Okay, but the pressure or the brakes come from the public. It's not like, because we don't have line item approval or anything else. Like the board is empowered to make that decision if it chose to, and then it would have to live up to whatever public scrutiny came afterwards.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, but the other part of it, when you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, you really don't want to come back at the end of the year asking for an appropriation to pay Peter back after you did that.
No.
That's not where you want to be, and that's where the board really ends up getting into a little bit of trouble.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine, pardon me for saying that you're going to be here for 10 years, Eric, but after, with Rich and Eric here, and and Robin as well, I can't imagine the three of them not objecting for their board proposing that to take money out of that.
Yeah, I did say the caveat. I'm not worried about it. I'm just trying to have the discussion so that we understand kind of.
No, I appreciate it because
I'm familiar with how the self-insurance thing works, and I also have seen it used as a piggy bank incorrectly, and it's always a mistake. Like,
and it's one of the things that Rich did mention in one of the presentations, but I'm glad you brought it up because in reality, that's one of the biggest risks to this beyond the expenses. And so, the real stopgap, unfortunately, is in the Board of Ed itself and that board, because the Board of Finance nor the RTM has overall approval to be a stopgap to it unless they're coming back for more money. That's where it gets handled.
Excuse me, I jumped on late here. Is this with the self-insurance for the health insurance fund? And I went to the Board of Ed meeting, and didn't it pass unanimously with the Board of Ed, first of all? And then secondly,
it hasn't been voted on yet.
Okay, but at that presentation, there's some kind of a maximum exposure, and then there is insurance bought. So you're self-insured.
Doug, I'm going to say, I'm sorry you came on late. We've already covered some of that. So if you don't mind, this will be out tomorrow and relook at that. I don't want to re-go through areas.
My point was, if you got more than your exposure in that fund, where it kicks in, then you can use the money. Isn't that how it works?
So that's correct. So if you have enough money in the fund to cover claims in excess of what you thought, that's when you would dip obviously into the fund balance.
Yeah. And then my last question. So it's unusual for the Board of Ed to be building up a fund that could be invested and grow on its own. How do you manage the excess?
So the board doesn't sit with the actual cash in its bank account to choose to invest in, whether it's like treasuries or CDs, et cetera. It's all still cash sitting with the town. It's just really how it's accounted for. So the town obviously has a treasurer. Paul knows the treasurer well. They choose on how to invest that money. So the board doesn't get the opportunity to say, we want to we have $1 million in fund balance.
I can never join the call.
We don't want to take that money and we want to put it in, a CD, or we want to buy like stock in NVIDIA or whatever it might be. That's not really the option available to the board.
Okay. So it's managed with the rest of the town's assets.
Right. It's pooled and that's done. But part of the way the treasurer figures out the terms and the investment types, having had long conversations with Joan, is that she also is looking at the cash flow needs of both the town and the Board of Ed. So like, as an example, in June, the Board of Ed typically needs money, and this goes back to the days when everybody was paid by check and people would go away for the summer and they didn't want checks being mailed to their house. So
Hmm.
typically teachers can get their July and August payments in June, if I'm not mistaken. And some people still opt to do that.
The majority of
So,
teachers do.
yeah, but it's based upon the old days when checks were mailed
Yeah.
and they were away. So that was part of the agreement. So,
Jack, this is Robin. Can I just make one comment because the board did talk about this, the issue of the reserves
yeah,
building up, and I want to address that because to the extent when Rich says that the ideal amount of reserves is sort of the 10 to 12% range, if it ended up building up as we had beneficial claims experience over a few years and it got to a point where it was at a 20% level or above that, then I think we would have a discussion about, if you have a level of reserves that's above 20%, then you probably need to return something back because that's not the best use of that money, probably for the town. And we haven't had that experience, obviously, but we have to kind of go with this year to year.
uh, Robin, I think that's an excellent point because there is a range that you're looking for. And if it exceeds it, then that's you either recalculate the next year to reduce that or you return it back into the budget.
But I would be careful because of the lag in claims. I think you need to be,
Yeah.
taking a multi-year look to let it build up because you never know.
Yes.
You might have a pretty bad experience versus not. So I think we have to be just watching that. And I know Rich will do a great job with that. So I would
Yeah,
hope
that's why
the
I'm assuming
trust
that
is
you're
there that will manage it appropriately.
well, that's why I'm assuming that when you were talking about it, you're talking after 3 or 4 years when you actually see what the balance is, what the experience is, not
Right.
after 1 year.
No, yeah, it would be like if you had 5 amazing years of claims and you really started to build up the reserves, that's when you're kind of looking at that.
Yeah, and there's several ways you can handle that, of course, because you can then go back and look at your stop loss limit or your self-insured limit, and you can raise it because you can afford it, and that'll drive down the premiums you're paying for that coverage. So, you know, the board will come back and look at how you optimize your insurance expense line. That totally makes sense to me.
Correct. So like as we said, the individual stop loss at 250, if you have really good claims, you could end up raising that maybe to 300 or
Yeah,
400 and then pay less premiums and then obviously take on more risk.
yeah.
It's really depends on the circumstances.
Yeah. It's like riding a bike. The hardest part is getting going. Once you're up and running, it gets easier and easier with each year. Those are all my questions, Jack.
All right. Doug, did you have a question on the self-insurance?
No, I'm good. I think I got it answered there pretty clearly. Thank you.
Okay.
Jack,
Does anybody? Okay, Paul.
Rich, for the benefit of everybody, would you go through the administrative procedures and how they're going to be handled by Brown and Brown?
Yep. So it's nobody in the back office at central office who's deciding whether or not to pay a claim for an employee. There's a third party administrator. For us, it's Anthem. We do work with Brown and Brown, who's our insurance consultant. So they provide us with reports every month. Even now, as a fully insured client, of what our claims look like. Who are our high risk claims? What do they look like on a month? What are the trailing claims? And so that'll continue. It'll just be on a individual self-insurance level. And then we have regular meetings with Rob Fitzpatrick from Brown and Brown to kind of go over where we're at, what everything looks like. But we're not going to be sitting there paying for, somebody's, doctor's visit individually and making that determination whether or not we should be paying it. That's still going through Anthem as our third party administrator. So that's not the work that we're taking on in the back office.
Well, and I told you the other night, I've worked with Rob and Brown for over 15 years and found their level of service and expertise unsurpassed.
So let me just ask a question contingent with that. So, when they used to issue checks or they're paying for a claim, they're paying, you're making the payment to the doctor? Are you going to be making them weekly or daily, or how does that
So
work? Or are they paying it and you're reimbursing them?
correct. So the latter. So Anthem is still paying the doctor that you go to, and then we're making reimbursements to Anthem. So currently the board is already self-insured for dental. Obviously, dental
Yeah.
is much smaller than it is for medical, and the swings in dental are much more minimal than um, health insurance. And so it'll work the same way. So every month we get a bill for dental insurance, and then we're paying for that dental insurance. The same thing's going to be happening with Anthem. The only difference is rather right now we're paying a rather consistent bill for being fully insured. The differences are really when somebody has a life-changing event, whether they get married or have kids, maybe that changes the premium or employees change. Now the bill is going to more fluctuate month to month depending on what those claims look like.
So, but the payment to Anthem is still going to be on a monthly basis,
Yes.
regardless of how much is put out that month.
Yes.
Okay. Uh, can we move on to the next thing? We handle self-insurance that everybody is now an insurance expert and can join Brown and Brown?
I just
Okay.
asked one quick question, Jack.
Sure.
Among the peer group towns that we compare ourselves to, the Greenwich, the New Canaans, the Westports, the Wiltons, are they all self-insuring, or are they still going through third-party providers?
New Canaan and Wilton are self-insured. Westport and Weston are in the state partnership plan, and then Richfield is fully insured.
Okay, so it's a mix. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Rich, you went through the pension and that, oh my goodness, the market was good, our pension is up.
Mhm.
So between Paul and Rich, for those who do not know, Board of Finance has a representative on the pension board. The pension board representative for the Board of Finance and our town is Paul. So there were certain things that I'm aware of, but I'd like the rest of the committee to know. Can you explain? Okay, so we're up 6%. That doesn't mean they're cutting
It's
things.
not
So
up. It's not up 6%. The funded ratio is
right, was 6
106%,
yeah.
and we made between 10 and 11% this past year. However, due to actuarial accounting, only 1/5 of that is recognized in the current year. And correct me if I'm wrong, Rich, you don't recognize market gains all at once. The actuarial costing of it is smoothed over time, and the result, however, is a reduction of at least 100,000 in pension expenses. Well, not pension expense. It's the annual recommended contribution to the pension fund.
By the way, the same holds if the market was down and we have losses, we'd have the reverse. We wouldn't have to cover the whole loss. We'd cover the actuarial 20%. So I know Rich mentioned that, but I want everybody to know it's not a seesaw windfall that we get this and the market's down and lower, it goes up. It's spread over 5 years.
And we had a valuation report at the last pension meeting, which was in early January, and I can forward that to you, Jack, if you don't have it, and you can distribute it to your members. It's public information.
Well, I've always appreciated that Paul has that role because that was one of the roles that I used to joke was like the military volunteer. Everybody else stepped back, and Paul was still in the front line. So
Been there, done that, Jack.
I know that. Yeah, well, actually, it wasn't that. It was the Navy. But go ahead. So, is there any other questions on the pension and how that's accounted for? Okay, on to special ed. Rich, I want to have a little bit of the conversation that we had at the end of yesterday's meeting. So, in the budget, there's money coming back from 5 students who are outplaced. And I'm assuming that's solely the tuition return. Is that correct?
Correct. So there's about 900,000 coming back from tuition. It's 5 students coming back from district and a couple students who age out.
Okay, so let me explain something on a study, and again, you can use that electric buzzer. That doesn't mean that extra services aren't being provided to the children, but this is a pool. So there were certain services provided to that child when they were outplaced. So you had a school psychologist and somebody else who's still following that and doing, because we're responsible for the IEPs and other status in there. When somebody comes back, they may need an OT, a PT, and some other services there. But typically they're using resources because somebody else freed it up because either they aged out or the program or the next PPT. The same way that if you look at a student who we have to outplace, there's typically a 40 to 60% savings, maybe 40% savings internally, because we're not providing certain services, the OT, PT, and other things like that. You do not necessarily see the actual savings in special ed because you have new students coming in, and those resources are allocated to other students within that larger pool. So while there may be savings associated with one particular student, it doesn't necessarily generate savings for the entire pool. Is that an appropriate way to explain that?
Yep, that's correct. I mean, so when a student comes back, if they're getting speech or OT or PT, and we have speech providers or OT or PT providers on staff, those staff members are picking up some of those hours that are being applied to those students.
And that was, I think, the question that Mike had asked during the meeting of Shirley that I wanted us to cover. So, yeah, there are some additional incremental services this child will now need, but they're either picking up what's already in, and if there's extra that we need, then we'll just bring in that resource to service them.
Correct. And we've added a lot of internal resources. So, the cost for us to deliver the service in our buildings, in our schools, in our programs is significantly lower than if the student is outplaced, and then you have to get additional services on top of that.
Is there, I told the committee, I did an analysis about 15 years ago when I was on F&B, and it was really to take a high level view of special ed to say, is this reasonable? And the analysis, and Eric, you might actually have better numbers on this, but it used to be that the average special ed student was twice the cost of your average student. That those in those categories that are identified as high need are 4 to 5 times the cost of the average special ed student. And that allowed me to look at the total number of students, do a quick little math. And if you're in 5-10% of what those numbers show, it means we're reasonable. And it was just for a high level, quick, down and dirty, reasonable analysis. So again, that was 15 years ago. I think the high needs may be a little bit more now, but that's what I've been using for years to take a quick look at special ed. So, any other questions on special ed?
Just an observation. It seems like in the special ed, this is like a self-insurance fund as well, because there's really no way to put a value or cost on what these students are going to require. So we kind of have a sensitivity. You're saying 50% is a good gauge, or double the cost of other students.
No, Doug, I'm going to disagree with you right away.
Okay.
All these students have IEPs. They can price out the number of hours of what they need in OT, PT, speech therapists, and that's how they determine what their thing is. So this isn't a roll of the dice.
It's
because
not that variable, what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, it's not variable because throughout the year, every student has at least one PPT I think they're typical in something like April and March for some reason.
They run all year round. It's
But so they have a moving target of what it is. It goes to the hours. This is a contract between the school district, the child, and the parent. So those are the hours that will be allocated in that. So that's how we build the staff model. The other thing that I heard from somebody, and it was actually in the education committee, special ed is not state laws. It is a federal law supported by Supreme Court cases on that law, even giving some things. So this isn't just the state is doing this. This is a federal government law that's been supported by the Supreme Court. So I just want to make sure everybody understands where this law comes from. But yeah, Doug, they have a really good idea of what their resources are for the year. And as new people come in, they see what resources are available and reallocate. So, any other questions?
Going forward, there might be an explanation of the variability of excess cost reimbursement, and Rich and I both know that quite well. It has only been funded to 100% once in the last 15 years. And how that, in addition to the variability of students leaving, entering, it's it's a mess to calculate. And one year in Ridgefield, I had 5 special ed students walk in August, and it's just a multivariable equation.
By the way, he's referring to 5 high need students walking in August. Normal,
Yeah.
just 5 you can handle. It's when the high needs, and it's based upon categories. So I'm just going to come up with it. If you maybe have a mobility issue, the high needs typically have 3 or 4 areas that they're working on. So they may have a speech, they may have a language, they may have PT. So it's not just that they have one issue; they have multiple issues, which put them into a high needs category.
And then there's an elaborate cost accounting exercise that Rich is familiar with for each student to make those claims. I had one admin assistant who almost her entire job was to put together a 2 to 3 inch binder covering all the students.
And they track them. So there may be in Darien, I'm just going to come up with numbers, which please don't correct me on that. Don't use that buzzer. We may be tracking 100 students to see if we're going to hit the 4.5 times that's been calculated by the state. But maybe only 60 will qualify for being submissions to the state for that. So the same way that Paul was describing what his organization did, you're tracking students, but not everyone that you're tracking will actually be submitted. Mike, go ahead.
I just have a quick question. In regards to special education, is that going to be part of the dashboard where we actually look at the hours, the number of needs, and whether we're meeting targets so we can be more efficient in responding to these kids' needs? Just like Paul said, it seems like we can't just leave it up to administrator. I wonder if we could actually put our IT.
Confidential, most of it.
Yeah, one, it is confidential. 2, the dashboard is not an efficiency tool. It's a tool to track students' academic progress that we'll be using internally.
So I do want to follow up a little bit on that because the course is over. And because I worked in banking, I always get the abbreviations wrong on this because I want to get to life insurance policy. You mentioned that the MTSS is somewhat similar to the SRBI, but it's a lot more sophisticated than the SRBI, I'm assuming, because that was an early warning thing, which actually when it was first introduced I actually went to the Board of Finance and say, pass this. I was on the RTM finance at that time. But is this more comprehensive than that?
Yeah, so it's definitely more comprehensive. I would say that over the years of implementing different intervention models, SRBI being the last one, the research has shown that, there are different ways to track students' progress, and you want tools to be able to do that because you know how long it should take to see the results of an intervention working with a child. So what MTSS does though is it starts with all students. So it's ensuring that all students are getting a core basic education that they're supposed to. And then based on there, through your assessments and through your MTSS process, you determine, are there students that need extra support with accessing the core curriculum in the classroom? So there are your kids that are tier 2. Tier 1 is everybody getting all of the core stuff that they need. Tier 2 is then, do you need extra support and help for kids that can be delivered in the classroom? And tier 3 is a higher level of support, potentially outside of the classroom, but they're all before special education services kick in. So there's a greater level of clarity and sophistication than the SRBI model. And it was something before SRBI too. I mean, it just changes every couple of years.
I do want to go back a little bit, actually about 20 years ago. The way before the SRBI came in was something called the discrepancy model. And so it was at certain grades where somebody was in 5th grade, the switch to 6th grade was so much, and that's where you would determine it. Or the switch from 8th grade to 9th grade is where you determined it, or possibly from 2nd to 3rd because the work got harder. The key of an SRBI is that if you can catch things early enough in the process, not only can you give the student the tools, but you don't have to deal with the social emotional aspects that child ends up accumulating as well, that I'm smart enough to do this, but somehow I'm not, and they feel bad about it. So the earlier you get to it, my understanding is reading, you get the most work to improve reading deficiency before child's age 10. So that's why all this work in the elementary school is really the building blocks to that final goal, that, the graduated student, because this really lays the foundation for that. So go ahead, Ed.
No, I was just going to echo and say agreed. You should write a book on all this stuff, Jack. I mean, you've got so much history here. You should definitely write a book.
Well, the other thing that thank you, but I actually had a kid who actually came out of special ed because she was more organized than they were, and I also had a high needs student. So when we're talking about all this, and the discrepancy and other things like that, just understand this is all geared for working on that. And I think that's what Beth had mentioned earlier, that we like the strategic vision. And the one thing I'm going to warn to everyone, it's really hard to argue with anything that's been presented. Honestly, it's going to be hard to argue with it next year as well. It's going to take a couple of years to see how this rolls out, with understanding that there'll be revisions in year 2 and year 3. But the first year is just the starting point. And so we have to have an understanding, not to be looking over the Board of Ed's shoulder next year saying, well, you haven't received, what's the success ratio? What's your matrix on this? To understand that it's going to take a couple of years to roll out, with all due respect. So, Laura, you look like you have a question.
I have a quick question. And it's a question about not wanting to tax the system and create an IEP if you think that a kid just simply needs more time on an exam. But in our system, you can't just simply get a little extra time on an exam.
Well, you can with a 504 plan,
504.
but there are certain requirements in order a
I
504 plan, which is not an IEP,
I
is typically modifications.
but that involves like resources, right?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Okay.
You can get extended time on an exam, and it doesn't require any extra resources. But you may have, because you may have to go to a testing center where there's a testing center, or if you have a 504 plan, and sometimes 504 plans are temporary because of a medical situation. So, for example, your child breaks their wrist skiing. It's their dominant hand that they write with, and they have a standardized test coming up. You do a very quick medical 504 and they get a scribe. So there's some resources for that, but it's totally dependent on the individual child.
Okay.
I was
But
wondering if we were going to teach
special
the child.
education services aren't delivered through a 504 plan. That's just modifications.
I thought that a 504 was kind of like starting the process and taxing the system from a special ed. Okay.
Totally separate. Sometimes people feel like, well, you went through the process, I didn't get an IEP, but they gave me a 504 instead. It's really not the same. It's quite different.
Okay, thank you.
But the hope is that we're really good at the intervention level and really good at tracking kids' response to the interventions, that we're able to address the needs without ending up in the process for special education services. If you do the MTSS work really well, you should end up in that place so that you can prevent kids from needing that higher level of support, because you're really tracking the interventions and monitoring that progress to ensure that what you're delivering is actually working. And when it's not, then you switch to a different intervention. You track that data and you get to the sweet spot of where it's actually impacting the child as a learner.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. I believe that we've covered a lot of things that I had on my calendar to cover today. Also, I'll just add, are there any additional questions on athletics, or I think the buses were adequately covered, that we're using the propane gas because the diesels are, that we have to do the switch. They figured out what the cost is. We have some additional vans that are coming here that looks like we're a car shop when you drive into the Board of Ed building, as they're taking all the good parking spots, the vans. But other than that, is there any other questions that we might have on the budget itself?
I have a random question, Jack, if I may. Has to do with the SSOs and the contract plan. A resident asked me whether or not this plan envisions a change in personnel for the SSOs.
There's no impact on the SSOs and the way we do security at the schools.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I like the fact that this new plan says that if an SSO is sick, rather than necessarily having a floater that we were hiring that we might or may not have, that this organization will supply the floater, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
Oh.
That's not accurate. We don't have a floater anymore. We use substitutes that work with us.
Okay,
The
that's
floater
better.
was
Okay.
eliminated last year, I believe, in the budget.
So the substitutes have the same qualifications of the SSO. I believe they're all former
Yeah.
police officers.
Yes.
Okay.
I know. A quick question. I know that one of the Board of Ed members asked Mr. Manfredonia some follow-up research on, did that ever come through by him?
Which follow-up
Like
research?
uniforms, or the handbook, like what his,
We said that we would come back to that. It wasn't expected that it would be before
I see.
the end of the
Okay.
budget process. That's a
Right.
longer term conversation. The handbook is, we've actually started to work on that. Being one of the folks involved closely with it, we've got our outline, and we're doing a crosswalk between our current handbook and the outline that we prepared for what will be included in the new handbook. And we've actually done some surveying of neighboring districts, and we've heard and requested, and we don't have it yet, the handbook from Greenwich, because our understanding is they've got some similar concepts in their handbook that we intend to have in ours. So that's a longer term project that we plan to have it wrapped up and distributed and educate the community on come fall.
Yeah, I also believe that there was a very good discussion on what the handbook will include and some of the challenges to it. From parents, I've paid for 5 years with this coach's program, and if not, blah, 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 which is accurate from a parental perspective. I honestly had a child that did not go to the coach. And then played with their own premier system. And they were not, after being a starter for a number of years, they weren't starting anymore. And anytime she went onto the pitch, the other coaches, knowing her from premier, double teamed her. But she couldn't get a starting role there. But that's neither here nor there. So, but there's a very good conversation about that at education, and I will defer to that conversation.
Dr. Byrne, are you getting feedback or focus groups on parents that have experienced both positive and negative?
We will be, yeah, in the athletics program, yes.
Yes. Okay. How is that being selected?
We haven't gotten to that point yet, but
Okay.
So I've always found the people that come with the biggest complaints are often very helpful to run things by. But we'll get a cross section. I'm sure we'll be working with CDSP as well. Always a great resource for getting input.
Great.
One of the models we might look at is captains' parents, kids who are in that captain role. So we just haven't landed on that yet. By the time we have a good draft to move forward, we'll be able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Is there anybody else who didn't have an opportunity to speak yesterday at the public hearing that wants to say anything at this time? Peter, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was good. Nothing that I didn't say last night.
Okay. Just a little administrative thing. So I mentioned it with Robin. And it was just as much our fault as the others. We have individuals from the committee that might speak at a public hearing, but they're speaking as an individual, not for the committee. I spoke to Robin, and we'll do a better job of organizing next year on that. So I'll leave it at that. Are we done with the education? Can I take a straw man? And because it's not on our agenda. Who here would pass the budget today at 3.51? Can you just raise your hand? All right, that gives you a sense of where you are, and congratulations to the board. Rich, thank you for joining us. Same with Robin and Eric and Paul. But that should be a good way to go into the Board of Ed. Peter, you have your hand
for having
raised?
us.
Okay,
You.
No, that's
Thanks for having us. Have a
accident.
great night.
thank you.
You.
Thank you.
We got you done in an hour.
Thank you very much.
All right. Board of Selectmen budget. Paul, are you leaving us? Thank you. Who's had an opportunity to go on to the WISPER? Because I know you did. Uh, uh, has everyone opened up the Excel spreadsheet yet? That is out there, at least signed on.
I I am having computer issues and I can't access anything on my computer, so I have not been able to. I have to use my husband's computer, and he's been tied up with things.
And I gotta admit, people. Okay, um, please let's get going because the Board of Selectmen budget review starts on the 9th. I've handed out. They have, if you need to know exactly what's covered and you've misplaced anything, the um, the agenda for the 10th and the 11th are already there. The agenda for the 9th hasn't been put out because there's a couple of items for the Board of Selectmen that are going to be coming onto um, the budget. I'm sorry, their agenda. There's the leasehold surrounding the Eversource will be on. We don't have anything to do with that. Uh, there's the sump pump ordinance, which I've been working on uh, and found some discrepancies. I'm trying to work them out with David Bain and Amy Zavatakis, and then meet with Craig to see if we can resolve them so that we can still go forward with this at in the February meeting. And the last one is there's a new one that just came on for about 600,000 plus. I don't recall. That's for the design work. It's an appropriation and bonding for the design work associated with the access to Great Island. We'll have to see. That's going to the Board of Selectmen on the 9th. It goes to the Board of Finance on the 10th. They're back to using Reed Hildebrandt because in theory they gave the most detailed analysis in response to the RFP. Go figure that they couldn't after they spent well over 2 years trying to figure out what was going on. They did come in with a higher bid though. So we'll have to see how that goes in the Board of Finance, whether or not the RTM has it. The survey is going on for redness and mead, which is good because that'll feed into that. Is there any comments on what you saw on the preliminary Board of Selectmen budget?
I've got a question, Jack, and maybe I misunderstand the spreadsheet or it's been updated. But when it shows the tax line under revenues,
Yep.
It's just very confusing. The tax collection department goes from 161, 170, 170, it drops to 90,000, 90 million. And I don't understand what's going on with how it's presented. It's as if something's missing that they haven't accounted for.
Well, there should be what I'll have to take a look at it, but don't forget that we're going to be having two separate tax lines on it. One is for
It's right here. Can you guys
okay.
see this?
Yeah, I'm
just,
looking at it.
I don't know. I've shared my screen. Can everybody see it?
I can see it.
We
Okay,
could see your
so
screen.
you can? So it goes from this 169 down to 89. And I don't understand what's going on. It doesn't, it kind of distorts the whole picture. So
Yeah,
I don't have an answer. I just thought you might. If you don't, it's okay.
well, I'll say that it looks wrong. That I'll give Jen a call tomorrow and say
Okay,
what's
maybe
going
I'm
on.
looking at the wrong thing, but anyway,
No, I don't think you are because
everything
it
else
showed
looked
us.
understandable to me.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
without
you
getting into
do.
questions.
You also do understand that and I'm just mentioning. Remember, everyone, that the taxes are going to be allocated to the reserve fund for the capital and then to the operating budget. We're seeing a large increase predominantly due to the significant increase in the in debt service.
Yeah, no.
And
For everyone's benefit, that's obvious, Jack. Like when you look at it, you can see our debt service is literally equal to what the Board of Selectmen's budget is, for example. Like,
yeah,
right. So we're going to see that number jump. I couldn't make sense of the spreadsheet's revenue side, and
yeah.
I
I
thought
also
maybe,
wanted to mention something else. Pardon me. Well, in Jen's analysis, where she shows it's about $900,000 of less earnings on the investment income, it's really more because our treasurer has earned more than what was in the budget. So, and that's just generally used for the general fund when we're looking to use it on a capital or things like that, what we can use to pay down. So while it only says we're losing 900,000 in investments, we're probably losing significantly more because we're not planning on having the overage that we've had the last 3-4 years. So that's a significant aspect to it as well that isn't showing up in the numbers. But yeah, I'll check that out tomorrow with Pierre.
okay.
With
just
Jen.
I'm sure she's got an explanation.
Yeah, remember, they're still working on it. That might be the explanation.
I view them sometimes as is
No, it's
anybody
a good
looking?
catch. It's a good
So the
catch.
answer is, oh, wait, $100 million is missing. Yes, somebody's looking.
Yeah, you're really real quick, I think.
I don't know. I haven't
So,
spent that much time with it, but
is there any other questions for tonight? If not, I'd like a motion not to adjourn yet. We have the minutes that I sent around for our last minute meeting. I think it was January 26th. And Pierre's name is correct. I did change everything here. And so, sorry about that.
I'm just fussy. What can I say?
No, I understand. And it's a 5-letter name. I'm supposed to be able to spell those.
You need a motion to approve the minutes. So
Yeah, I
moved.
need a motion. So Pierre move, Mike second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, so that passes unanimously. We need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have Pierre and Beth. I have to write this down. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed the time with Eric and Rich and Paul. Have a good
He
evening.
is so much easier to follow. That's all I can tell you.
Better.
No shenanigans, clear, concise, like so much better.
Yeah,
Coherent. Coherent is
Great.
what the board I used last night.
yeah.
Makes sense. It all follows the tracks
Oh,
on priorities. Everything is understandable.
yeah.
Okay. So now that we're done, I'm stopping the recording of the meeting. Everyone have a good evening. Have fun at the Super Bowl, wishing for one of the two teams. So
Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
Jeff.
take care,
Good night.
guys.
Night.
And